Motion carries. Board members, we are on.
I'd like to be recorded as opposing the idea about textbook selection, and also, Mr. Bayer, what was the other one?
The letter grade.
We're getting ready to bring up letter days. You'll get a chance to.
Y'all pulling the letter grade discussion?
It is a read, yes, sir.
Okay, well then,
Pulling number
I have a
7.
chance to.
Okay, duly noted, both of you. Okay, now, we're on one item. It's item number 7, and I'm going to ask you, Mr. Bayard, to read it.
Yes, it's a read. On motion of Mr. Romer, seconded by Ms. Buquet, the Student School Performance and Support Committee deferred until the board meeting on Thursday, December 9, 2010. Consideration of the implementation of Act 718 of the 2010 legislative session relative to letter grades for schools and the school and district accountability system.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bayard. Board members, we have 2 people who want to speak. They both had an opportunity to speak on Tuesday. Depending on how this conversation goes, I'm going to reserve my privilege to allow them to speak again. Is there a motion on this?
Can I ask
Okay.
a question? Is this new information?
I would
Yes, sir.
move that we approve the superintendent's recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a second on that?
I'd like clarification on the superintendent's recommendation.
Is this
Okay.
the
We had it
superintendent's
before.
Superintendents, who has a copy of the original superintendent's recommendation? Is that what's just been handed out to us?
Is this what we have?
One second.
Is Chris, would you take the mic?
Yeah.
He can help us with this.
That's right. Board members, good morning. Chris Meyer from the department. This is the same proposal you saw at Tuesday's meeting. There was one addition to that, which was the upper range was asked to be clarified of 120 to, and we put to 200. So it's 120-200. That's the only addition to this one, to show that there is an upper range for those SPS scores.
And
Can I
Mr.
ask a clarification?
Yes, sir.
Do we have the asterisk part in this proposal as well, the asterisk referencing the different types of schools? Did that get included in our
That was
proposal?
included. Correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so
Say that
essentially, what you're looking at in front of you is the superintendent's recommendation. Is that correct, Mr. Meyer?
That's correct.
Okay.
Where is the
So,
asterisk?
yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, where is the asterisk?
Got me some candy.
Chris, answer the question, please.
Where is the asterisk?
The asterisk was a notation that whenever we do produce the scores, it should be listed in the executive recommendation, or on that sheet. It should be one of the items on there.
It's not.
Just a moment, I will.
Second page.
Oh, it's the top of the page, item E, the Louisiana, on page 2, top of the page, item E in blue, the LDE should identify all schools that have selective non-traditional admission requirements. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, let me get a proper motion, and then we'll begin the discussion. I have a motion by Mr. Lee to approve the superintendent's recommendation. Is there, which is now, is clear, is that it is in front of you? And this would be an approval for a notice of intent, Mr. Lee? Okay, I need a second. Is there a second?
I have a question before.
I have a substitute motion.
I'll make a second for purposes of discussion.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. Mr. Romer,
Question and
then
then
Mr. Bennett, did you ask to speak?
Is the question
Okay.
count as one of my two?
Yes.
What about a series of questions?
No, a question is different, I think, than speaking to an item. You can ask a question, because...
All right, as presented, just for clarity,
I'll get to you.
in this proposal we're seeing, is there what people have referred to as a bump? If a school receives a D but hits their growth target, they get a C minus? Is that what this includes?
That's correct. This proposal is one where schools that, based on their absolute SPS performance, they fall into a letter grade category. If that school additionally met its growth target, which means that it in the C, D, and F range would be a growth target of 10 points, if the school met its growth target, it would have a letter grade increase, but it would have a minus next to it. So it is a partial letter grade increase in the definition that I'll use. So if a school fell in the F range, but hit its growth target, grew 10 or more points in a year, it would actually be labeled as a D- school. So that's what this proposal includes.
And clarification, in order to meet the growth target, it's not what was previously recommended, that they hit the top 25% of the average of growth, but in fact the accountability growth target that exists in our current accountability structure. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. This was what we were noting as sort of the compromise proposal. The Accountability Commission and the superintendent's Tiger team originally recommended that the top 25% of schools in each category would get a bump up. The compromise proposal is that only those schools that meet their growth targets in those bottom categories would get a partial increase. And then additionally, we added that schools that fall in the A and B range that hit their growth targets, which are smaller by definition because they don't have as far to go to hit the 120 mark, they would be noted with a plus. So the public would be able to distinguish that there are incentives for schools that not only perform well, but have gone above and beyond in terms of their performance in that year, and compared against themselves. It's a known target for them. That's what we're calling the compromise proposal.
Okay, Mr. Romer, have you still have a question or comment?
I'll wait.
Okay.
I'm gonna have
Madam
more
Chairman?
comments.
Okay,
I have a question.
okay, let me start on this end. I'm going to start with Mr. Bennett, and then who's next? Ms. Buquet? Ms. Givens? We'll go this way. Ms. Johnson. Okay, Mr. Bennett.
I'm in support of this proposal. I'm just wondering if the intent of the legislature was for greater transparency and clarity for our parents especially. And I think this is a step in the right direction, but I'm also wondering, I don't know, perceptions or reality. And when a parent sees a D for a school, what does that really say in terms of the success or lack of success of that school in regards to the scores of how children are faring in that school? That means a D means what percentage are performing at basic or above at a D level? Do you have that off the top of your head?
Yes, at this level, and I'll say it in terms of the students performing below basic. At a D level, there would be approximately 37 to 61% of the kids in the school would be below grade level.
And therefore, conversely, that opposite number would be
Right.
performing at basic or above.
Right.
Okay.
So 53% to 39%.
It just seems to me that giving a D without that explanation attached to all of those letter grades does not give as much transparency. And actually, as a principal or a superintendent, if I had a C or D school, I'd like parents to know that the school as a whole may be functioning in that level, but I've got kids and students who are performing according to our own scores at level or above in that school. I think that's just a fair way to show the scores of the school. I'd almost offer that as a substitute motion.
Well, you can make that as an amendment to the motion that this policy also include a explanation, perhaps, of the percentage of students who are performing both above and below basic.
That would be my motion, yes, my amendment.
You're welcome, Mr. Bennett. Okay, so there's an amendment to the motion that exists. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Garvey. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Next is Ms. Buquet.
Yes, I had, I surely support that amendment, and Chris, I had asked you about that earlier, that I thought we should have another column, and it should be stated as a fraction so that everyone understands above and below. So I think that's a very, very important addition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Buquet. Ms. Givens.
Thank you. Chris, on page 2, I'd like to talk to you about C, 1, 2, and 3. In this one, you're saying that schools advance a letter grade if they meet their growth target in the C, D, and F ranges. However, a minus will be applied to the resulting grade. So if a school in C, D, and F meet their growth target, they advance, say a school in F meets its growth target.
Right.
It goes up to a D with a minus.
Correct.
Okay. Then you look at number 1, 2, and 3. and consider whether or not these alphabets that you're using in these examples should be C, D, or F. Because I don't think you're saying, I think, well, maybe you need to have a C1A and a C2. C1 would talk about school, what happens to schools with A or B
Right.
averages, and then C2 would talk about what happens to C, D, and F, because it's a little confusing when I go down and say that schools with a grade of A will earn an A plus if they, you see what I'm saying?
I do.
I think it needs to be broken down further to clearly show that A's and B's will get pluses if they meet their target.
Right.
But C, D's, and F's have a whole different configuration if they meet their growth targets.
Right.
Okay.
And just for clarification too, I mean, whether we change it or not, this is an important point that superintendents, the Accountability Commission, and the superintendent recognize, which is you can't grow your way into an A. You've got to earn the A. In fact, you've got to earn all your grades. I mean, nobody's being given anything in this. I mean, it's all about what you're earning. And what we thought with the pluses for the A and B's was to have some incentive for those schools to continue to grow and earn the plus in that regard.
I understand the
Right.
rationale, but I'm just saying, if I were a person reading this and didn't know the rationale, this would be a little confusing. And I think maybe in your explanation, you might also say that it's, that schools must do whatever the requirement is to get to an A or a B, rather than have it lumped the way it is. I don't think it's clear. And that's a housekeeping comment.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like, I mean, we're all going to, our policy by its very nature is complex. I think then we get plenty of complaints about that. Any way that we can to simplify that the districts understand it is a good thing. Thank you, Ms. Givens. Next, I believe is Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. I also support the amendment because I think that that if we're going to give a school a D minus, which of course the minus and plus items were not part of the Accountability Commission, nor were they part of the superintendent's recommendations, but they do include growth. So, and the superintendents and the Accountability Commission were both very concerned about having growth built into this. So if we're going to give them growth, I think that it is very wise to say that this school may be a D school, but this school has X percentage of its children performing at basic.
Okay.
And above or whatever, however that item goes. Because we keep saying we want to communicate to the parents a better way of looking at this, and we want it more transparent, then it needs to be something that they clearly understand, that the school may have a letter D, but you may have children in the school who are actually way above that. And so that people don't decide to have neighborhoods become totally abandoned, and schools become totally abandoned, that they realize that the school has some
That's
very
what
good
Mr.
potential in
Bennett-
it.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Romer, and then at this point, after you speak, Mr. Romer, I'm going to see if our speakers still want to address the board. Mr. Romer.
Sure. A couple points, and I'm going to have a substitute motion. I agree with Mr. Bennett's amendment. I think it leads to greater transparency. I think that's what this process is about, giving parents easily defined information that they can digest and make decisions. I think his amendment helps that. And it helps the schools. It gives a better portrayal of what is and is not happening within a school. It doesn't tell the whole story, but I agree with his amendment. I don't agree with bringing a school from a D to a C minus because of its growth. I don't. Now, I would consider an alternative, which would be a D with a plus that indicates they're growing, but it'd be a D plus, not a C minus. I don't agree with changing a grade up a letter, because I think mentally a parent that glances at this quickly, and let me tell you what most parents will do if we're lucky. They will glance at this. But parents are busy, parents have burdens. They probably won't spend as much time as they should understanding this. And to glance and see a C is a lot different than glancing and seeing a D. That's what I believe. So I think it's not genuine to move someone from a D to a C. I don't have a problem indicating somewhere on this grade whether they're reaching their growth target or not. I think that's important. I think that's good information. But to move it up a letter grade, I don't agree with.
So, Mr. Romer, would you have every...
Get finished.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Secondly, I do believe the numbers that you've come up with here and the letter grades correspond to our current school performance scores. I think you've done a good job capturing that.
Madam
So-
Chairman,
Mr. Romer's not finished, Mr. Bayard.
I know what, just make note.
You're next.
But at some point, we have to consider the scale itself. Now, with all due respect for people that work hard and are part of the solution, and there are plenty of them in this room, and they're all over our schools working hard and a part of the solution, to suggest that a school that has over 60% of its kids below grade level is a D, that's not a D. That's an F. You're failing 6 out of 10 kids in that school. Doesn't mean there's a lack of effort. I don't know what it means. We should go use these grades as a way to get people to go explore what it means in their school. I would suggest this scale is horribly low. And there are people that argue, well, it's relative compared to my school down the street. Guys, we don't live in a world where we get to compare ourselves to the person down the street. We're going to be compared with people not only in other states, but other countries. And this scale is not reflective of a competitive scale in this world. It's not. It is not. Now, I asked you to give me some more homework, which you did, and I appreciate it. I asked for one example of another state that had done this, some more information. We mentioned Florida, and I'm not suggesting we are Florida or should be Florida. But it was interesting. They have raised their scale. They did start at one point, and they did raise their scale. So I would suggest at the very least, if my motion fails today, that at some point we'll need to revisit this scale. That we incorporate Mr. Bennett's amendment. And I think that's my motion.
I'll second that, Mr. Romer.
Okay, we have a motion, a substitute motion, and a second to essentially, I'm just going to read it the way I heard it, to remove the letter bump for improvement and to incorporate Mr. Bennett's amendment.
Substitute it with a plus, right?
Yes, it would all be pluses.
Okay.
And approve as a notice of intent.
Madam President, or a minus if they don't meet their growth target. I think pluses and minuses do play a part here.
Well, that's a different discussion. That's not what Mr. Romer said. I think.
What do you think, Mr. Romer?
I think achieving. Well, it's not. I'm not going to comment to it. If you want to not accept Mr. Romer's amendment, you can.
Actually, I seconded his motion, but I'm asking him, will he accept that amendment?
Yeah, I don't mind that.
That they have pluses and minuses relative whether or not they meet their achievement growth?
And we clearly indicate to parents what the plus and what the minus means.
Absolutely.
Plus means the school is reaching its growth target, and minus means it's not.
Okay.
I think that's good information. That's more clarity.
And Mr. Romer, this retains the scale as presented by the superintendent?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Mr. Superintendent.
A
And
point
Mr.
of
Bayer.
a point of clarification. I understand how you would arrive at the plus if they meet their growth target, but some of them grow and don't meet their growth target, and then some of them decline. Now, I would hate to put a minus on people who don't meet a growth target. If they're declining, maybe a minus. We tried to stay away from the idea of not meeting growth target because it does get into this whole array of what is not meeting the growth target and how much growth is enough. So we tried to stay away from that, and we tried to focus on the positive because we do want to reward and use the higher, in our case, the higher grade to do that. So I just say that I don't want to conflict with, but I just want you to understand there are more complications to this.
I'll modify, again, if everyone will indulge me, that we do the plus as contemplated in my original motion, but the minus be used only in those instances where there is decline.
Well, Madam President,
Ms. Gibbons?
I understand what the superintendent is saying, but now I see there are three things that we need to get out. We need to get out what the achievement level is. We need to get out whether or not it's a school in decline or a school that's on an upward trajectory. And maybe one asterisk is not enough.
Well, that's what, part of this, we have to be careful not to overcomplicate this.
Yeah, it gets,
And
the further
we're talking about school performance score,
Yes.
correct? We're talking about solely school performance
I
score.
understand.
We're not getting into
So-
assessment indexes or anything.
So the superintendent is saying that a plus or minus may not be enough to tell what's actually going on. And I thought we were trying to do is get something that, as a parent, I can look at and say, this is a school, that's a C school, it's meeting its growth target, and it is not a school in decline. So what is that?
Get a plus, because if it's
A school, or a school that is meeting its growth target,
You're-
and is not a school in decline. What do you give them, 2 pluses?
See, I think now
It's more
you're making it very
complicated.
complicated for parents.
No,
Yeah.
we need to agree on what we're trying to say, use the plus or minus to show that, and put an explanation as to what we're showing. Now, and then maybe it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than what these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stars. You know, it's way past that.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
I don't know how specific can we get if we're going to use 2 symbols.
Mr. Superintendent.
One of the things the Accountability Commission wanted to stay away from was making it complex, because the purpose of the exercise is to make it simple. But I would simply say this, and this is a matter of
No.
policy. Do you want to give people some recognition for growth, which is, I think, what the real objective is, or do you want to give them a negative for not growth, which I don't think is really the object of the exercise, and then it further complicates it when you give them a negative for non-growth of figuring out what non-growth is. So my suggestion is, and this is, I think, consistent with the superintendents, what they would say is, give us the recognition for growth, and otherwise just give us a letter grade. And so the recognition for growth should be on the plus end and not necessarily on the minus end, because it also gets very complicated.
Okay. Thank you, and I think that's a good point. Mr. Bayard, do you still want to speak to this?
Yes,
Okay, well then let me just lay out the plan. Mr. Bayard, Mr. Lee, Mr. Garvey, and then we'll go from there.
You know, the other day I was talking about the free and reduced lunch kids, and you know, you can have a 90% free and reduced lunch number in your school, and a 70% can have a more adverse student population.
Mr. Bayard, is this germane to the motion?
It is very germane.
I'm just checking.
This does not allow those schools to be given proper consideration. If most of my free and reduced lunch kids are free lunch kids, what I've seen, their average scores are way down. So for that principal to do well to bring that school up is a lot more of an accomplishment than we're giving them credit for. It's not germane. I think it is. And I think one day I would like to see us really get into this. So with that in mind, I move that this be discussed at the next Accountability Commission, and that's in order. We're under my committee.
We have, right now, we have a motion and a second. So are you making a substitute motion, Mr.?
No, this is probably
I have 3
more-
motions, so it's
This is a
improper.
recommendation that
Okay.
we ought to follow. I would like to just see that put on the agenda, but I'm against the motion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lee, I don't think I can take any more motions. I'm being advised. Mr. Lee and then Mr. Garvey.
I think we can tell from the discussion here that this gets very complex in a hurry. And if it's going to have any meaning at all, it needs to be simple as possible. I personally am opposed to the law. I'm opposed to the labeling. I think it's a downer for teachers that are working very hard to meet the present accountability requirements. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to really do damage to morale. It's going to not be understanding to parents, but it is the law. So we need to implement it. But we need to keep it as simple as possible. I think the superintendent has done a lot of work. He's talked with a lot of different people, including all the superintendents. I would ask that you reject the substitute motion because that labels more schools failure, and that we go with the original motion, which is the superintendent's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Garvey.
Yes, let me ask for a point of information first, or point of order. We have a substitute motion on the floor.
What's the last motion? That's the one
It's
that's...
a substitute motion.
The
if I
last
understand it
motion
right.
is by Mr. Romer and Ms. Givens, and it's a substitute motion to remove the letter bump from the system, incorporate Mr. Bennett's amendment, approve as notice of intent, clearly indicate that a minus is only used when a school is when there is decline.
I'd like to speak to my motion and call the vote on my motion, and then we can move on from there.
I don't think he can do that.
Mr. Garvey's advising me that he can't do that. He has
My
the floor.
understanding is that if there were an amendment to the motion on the floor, then I could not offer a second amendment. But because there is a substitute motion on the floor, I can offer an amendment to the substitute motion.
As a lawyer, as you being a lawyer, I'm going to agree to it.
And
Parliamentarian, I'm here to tell you.
Okay, Mr. Garvey, go ahead.
the amendment I'd like to offer is in line with the superintendent's recommendation, which would be to remove the minus sign provision that's in the substitute motion.
Okay.
I don't accept the amendment.
I don't either.
Well,
Okay.
If it doesn't get a second, it doesn't get a second.
Anyone want to second Mr. Garvey's amendment to the motion? Hearing none, motion,
I'll second it, but I would prefer that we just vote against the substitute motion, even if it's amended.
You know,
okay, I'm going to handle this.
handle
I'm
it.
not going to second.
Okay, Mr. Lee's not going to second. Mr. Garvey's motion fails for lack of a second. Board members, we're going to get this done. Hang on. Mr. Romer.
Well, I'm against Mr. Garvey's amendment.
Well, it failed. Yeah.
I know.
Yes, it did. No, Mr. Lee withdrew his second.
He can't withdraw his second once he offers it.
Why he can't? He can change his mind.
Take him to
I
court.
think so.
Okay,
That's why,
the chair
that's why you can't be
rules.
the
Board members.
parliamentarian.
Okay, then I'm going to rule that there was a second to Mr. Garvey's amendment to the motion. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Yeah, all opposed?
No.
That failed. Mr. Romer?
Oh, very good, Penny, very good.
I don't think the plus and minus is that complicated. I mean, as a parent, I'm going to get a letter grade. I'm going to see it. It's going to have next to it what percentage of the kids are above and below basic. And then there's going to be a plus or minus. There's a plus if the school is growing, hitting its growth target. There's a minus if the school is in decline. That is very simple to understand. Now, we're underestimating the public if we don't think they can understand that. And the point of this is transparency. And what that letter grade that we just described would tell them is the exact status of their school. What percentage of the kids are doing what we want them to do in terms of achievement, and whether the school is either improving or in decline. And that tells me a great deal about my school right away. Very easy to understand.
Okay, well, that's the amendment on the floor. Mr.
Point of
Romer?
information.
Yes, sir.
Does this mean that some schools will get an F plus and some will get an F minus?
Yeah, F minus, yeah.
Okay.
You can only get an F or an A.
Question on the motion, please.
Mr. Bayard?
I call question.
Oh, question on the motion.
Yeah.
I have 3 speakers. I'd like to ask if they still would like to speak, given where we're headed. Mr. Donald Sanji? Did I get a yes? He had to leave, okay. Patrice Peugeot? Okay, please come to the table. And then Bridget Nealon. And I'm going to ask each of you to limit your remarks to 2 minutes. We've had hours of discussion on this, both on Tuesday and today. Thank you.
My name is Patrice Peugeot, and I'm Superintendent of Schools in Ascension Parish. I also represent the superintendents on the Accountability Commission. Certainly, we've had a lot of discussion around this issue. I am just here to urge you to value what it means for a school to meet its growth target. I respect what Mr. Romer is saying in terms of transparency to parents. I think that giving the bump still provides transparency to parents. I guess at the bottom line is what you value in a school. If I am a parent and I have one school that has a C and it's not growing, and I've got another school that has a D but is growing, and I give that second school the C minus, I'm here as a parent and as a superintendent to say, I'd rather have my kid in the C minus school, because it's a school that's on the move, that's doing the things we ask schools to do in order to serve our students. So if we really want to show parents what is important in a school, I think that's a piece that has to be a part of this accountability. And I do support, given these two options, I strongly support the superintendent's proposal.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nealon.
No, it's not on, Bridget.
My name is Bridget Nealon. I'm with the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. We supported Representative Badon and Senator Appel's legislation because we really think any increased transparency to parents and to the public is a positive thing. And I do not understand how giving a D school a C increases transparency. I agree that growth needs to be rewarded. The people making their growth targets are working harder and faster than just about anybody in the state. But by giving a student a false label, I don't think you're really achieving that goal, and you're not being honest with the public, even though that probably is not your intent. I know your intent is all positive. However, when legislation is passed, you have to adhere to the legislation if it passes. You don't overly complicate it or change the process because you don't like what the results show. So I guess I'm here in support of Mr. Romer's motion, although I think in the legislation it was supposed to be very simple, A, B, C, D, F. The public understands it, give the school those grades, and as we've learned from accountability in the last dozen years, information helps schools improve. It doesn't hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nealon. Mr. Bayard called the question. Let's go ahead and have a roll call. The motion, do we need to restate the motion that we're voting on? Mr. Romer's motion? No? Okay, roll call.
Mr. Bayard?
No.
Mr. Bayard votes no. Mr. Bennett?
No.
Mr. Bennett votes no. Ms. Branford?
Yes.
Ms. Branford votes yes. Ms. Buquet?
Yes.
Ms. Buquet votes yes. Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey votes yes. Ms. Givens?
Yes.
Ms. Givens votes yes. Mr. Geis is absent. Ms. Johnson?
No.
Ms. Johnson votes no. Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Lee votes no. Mr. Romer?
Yes.
Mr. Romer votes yes. Ms. Dastugue?
I'll vote yes.
Ms. Dastugue votes yes. Motion passes.
Does that conclude this committee? Mr. Bayard?
Well, we have no more reads, and I don't think we have any more to pull.
Madam Chair, can I
Yes,
just
sir.
make one comment? I know we voted, but I still want to please make a comment.
Yes, sir.
Chris,
I think this was a serious decision, and I think it's going to cause schools to be labeled when the school is not totally responsible for the achievement of children. It takes more than a good teacher. While a good teacher is critically important, what that child brings to school with them is also important. Their background experiences, the family support, and all of that is going to be reflected in the school grade. And it's going to make it appear that that school should be responsible totally for that child. And I just think that's a serious mistake that's going to, if there's a effort to hurt education, I think this is going to do it.
Take me to court.
he was trying to kill me, so I told her I'd take the purse.
Next
Mr. Lee.
item is
That
item...
concludes your comments, Mr. Lee? Thank you. Next item.
Next item is item 11, Board Advisory Council reports. We have reports for non-public school commission, Superintendent's Advisory Council, Textbook Media and Library Advisory Council. The recommendation is to receive the minutes and approve the tentative agenda.
Move to receive.
Mr. Bennett, do we have a second?
Second.
Bradford? Do we have any questions on the motion?
They're in the back of this.
Hearing none, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 12, behind tab 12 in your packet, Board Advisory Council report, appointments. There are 2 appointments.
Move approval.
Mr. Lee, second. Ms. Gibbons, do we have any questions on the motion? Hearing none, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next
How did
item.
you get there?
Yeah, what happened?
It was abdication or a beheading.
One meeting
or
and she's gone?
That was my plan from the beginning.
Quentin, I think you need to up your insurance because,
Not now.
but,
Nobody's going to take me out.
oh, no. Quentin. She's gone already? I mean, first
Okay.
she took her jacket off and now she's gone. Wow.
We move to item 13 on the agenda, receive and/or refer items A through I.
Move to receive and refer items A through I.
Okay,
Gibbons?
is this where I need to make another receive and refer?
Yes.
Just after we approve this, I think we'll recognize you.
Second.
Second, Ms. Bouquet. Do we have any questions?
Nope.
Hearing none, do we have any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Ms. Johnson.
I'd like to move that an item to the RSD committee, and the item that I'd like to bring forth is to have the department bring to us a plan for neighborhood schools in New Orleans, so that at least 50% of the incoming students have a right to enter the schools within their neighborhoods.
Do we have a second?
I'll second for purposes of discussion.
It's a receive and refer.
Receive and refer.
Well, can I ask a question? Sure. Ms. Johnson, we are presently working on a plan.
Let me interrupt a second. Can we, I'd like to entertain a new slate of officers. No, just kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Wow, that was the quickest.
We already thought you advocated. With what? You're back?
I'm back.
No yo-yoing of that in that seat.
Yes, ma'am. Who was speaking?
All right, I was.
Okay, go.
My question is this: we're working on districting in the district. Right?
Working on what?
working on establishing school districts in New Orleans already. All right, and
Neighborhood school districts?
huh?
You're working on
Neighborhood schools, yes. And it's a plan where 60%
That's what she knows.
of the spaces will be open to children in the neighborhood.
Well, they need to bring that back. I have not seen that.
Well, we haven't finished it yet, but that's something that we're working on. Now, maybe you want to direct us to work a little bit faster.
Oh, yeah, I think it needs to happen, because there's no such thing as that's why I tried to make it where that lottery was.
You're not leaving me behind on this one. I've always thought we need to have some provision for children in the neighborhood. It's going to reduce transportation costs, and it's going to address the sleep deprivation issue. So maybe you want us to come back with an update on the progress?
Yes, I do.
All right, because this is not something that can just be done for those 4 schools.
You ready for
It's
it?
got to be done for
That
the
has
parish.
nothing to do with those
All right.
4 schools.
Citywide.
This is a
Citywide.
citywide thing that I'm trying to get
Okay.
done. Come on, y'all roll. Which I thought should
So
have
is
been
this a
included in
motion
the
that's been
transition
duly
plan.
seconded? A motion to receive and refer. Any opposition? Motion carries.
Okay, we move to item 14 on the regular agenda and item 15 on the emergency agenda. The item is 14 is consideration of executive session regarding litigation concerning 14A, Louisiana High School Athletic Association, Inc. versus State of Louisiana et al., 19th Judicial District Court, State of Louisiana, number 596375, Section 27, and 14B, Cassandra Berry et al. Versus Paul Pastorek et al., United States District Court, Eastern District, Civil Action number 10-4049C4.
And on the emergency agenda, the consideration of executive session regarding litigation regarding A, Orleans Parish School Board versus Paul G. Pastorek in his capacity as State Superintendent of Education, Erin Bendeley in her capacity as Director of Charter Schools for the Louisiana State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and Louisiana Department of Education, and the Louisiana State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education docket number 10-11454, Division I, Civil District Court, Orleans Parish, and 15B, Louisiana Federation of Teachers, East Baton Rouge, Federation of Teachers, Jefferson Federation of Teachers, Vernon L. Bolden, Bernice Gunner Holliday, Terry Ann Johnson, and Rachel Raspberry versus State of Louisiana and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, docket number 592208, 19th Judicial District Court, Section 24, East Baton Rouge Parish, and 15C, Ray Hayes as successor to Susan Hayes versus Louisiana Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, docket number 2010-C-1640, Supreme Court of Louisiana.
Whoa. I have to ask for a roll call vote on the motion to go into executive session. We need 2/3 affirmative vote, members present, to pass this motion.
Motion.
Thank you, Ms. Givens. Second by Ms. Buquet. All in favor?
Aye.
Do I have 2/3?
Roll call vote.
It's a roll call
It has to
vote.
be a roll call.
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Bayard?
Yes.
Mr. Bayard votes yes. Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett votes yes. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford votes yes. Ms. Buquet?
Yes.
Ms. Buquet votes yes. Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey votes yes. Ms. Givens?
Yes.
Ms. Givens votes yes. Mr. Geis is absent. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson votes yes. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is absent. Mr. Romer?
Yes.
Mr. Romer votes yes. Ms. Dastug?
Yes.
Ms. Dastug votes yes.
Okay, audience, I'm obliged to inform you that no votes will be taken in the executive session.